This is Dennis Donohue, and back again with my good friend Peter Wren-Hilton to do another episode of the Grower Talks. And I'm looking forward to this one. And I like the YouTube piece because it kind of underscores. I always like to tell our guests I Googled you, and Pam Marrone is a woman who needs no introduction, but I deliberately made her keep her sign in her office up because if I note it says the office of the queen, and I think it's fair to say Pam is the queen of biologicals. So exciting to have her with us.
I absolutely agree, Dennis. This is one of those podcasts I've really been looking forward to, and I also regard Pam as being the kind of the doyenne of biologicals. So we'll mix metaphor, queen, doyenne.
Well, I don't know
but I
that
think
word,
both.
so I'm going to take your word for that. That's a good one.
Me
Oh
too.
no,
I'll take that word too.
Yeah, yeah,
no,
yeah.
no, it's
Boy, and if Pam doesn't know it, then it must be.
No, I don't know that one.
no, no.
It's either impressive or obscure, one or the other.
It's
Anyway,
it is very impressive.
all right, no doubt. All right, Pam, welcome. Good to have you with us today.
Great to be here.
It's and we're looking forward to this conversation. In fact, we might even pick up on the conversation we were having before we got on the air. You told me what you were up to. I said you just can't seem to help yourself. So why don't we start out with kind of a news flash? What we always like to ask people their background and what are you up to now? We're going to reverse it a little bit. What are you up to now? And tell us about your kind of the journey to your latest adventure.
Yeah, I'm a serial entrepreneur in the biological space. So I started up my fourth company. It's called the Invasive Species Corporation, and we got funded, seed and pre-seed and seed funding. So we're on our way. We have two lines of business. One is uh, aquatic invasive species control, mussels, burrowing shrimp and oyster beds, invasive carp. And then on the other side, agriculture for controlling weeds. We're going to look for that holy grail bioherbicide that really works and can compete with chemicals.
So I think, Pam, I'm actually going to go back a little bit because, as Dennis implied, and as we all know, you've had three successful exits. So I really want to go back to the very beginning. What was
Okay.
it about this whole area of technology and stuff that got you interested? What's your roots? What started
It
the
was
journey?
actually, it was actually growing up in a rural area in Connecticut, southern Connecticut, which on about 40 acres of beautiful land, and I got interested in insects and all kinds of things. Had a 2 acre bass fishing and swimming pond, and but most importantly were these gypsy moths. They call them now spongy moths because gypsy moths is not politically correct anymore. And they came through and devastated the trees, and I would just be shocked at what these things could do, and learned about biocontrol. My mother taught me about that there was actually a naturally occurring bacteria that you could control these with, and my father used it. He wasn't sure it worked, but which is what the problem with biologicals in general, that doubt, which we can talk about. But I used it decades ago. And when he died, I actually found a bottle of BT, one of the brands of BT, in the garage that he had used. Anyway, I got into it, and then after graduate school, I went to graduate school as an entomology undergraduate, Cornell, and then NC State PhD, and I got a job at Monsanto Company, and they were converting away from chemicals into, well, obviously became GMO, but they asked me to set up a new unit looking for new ways to control pests, and I set up one of the first natural product screening programs from microbials, from microorganisms, and we screened over 100,000 microbes, and that program was cut in favor of the GMO stuff, which of course was very successful for Monsanto. But I fell in love with microbes, and I've been in it ever since.
That no, that's great. When we look at your first three exits, and as I said, it's not too many people I've ever spoken to who've had three successful exits in the bioag space. How did those progress? I mean, I'll mention the three by name. There was Entotech, there was AquaQuest, and then obviously Marrone Bio Innovations. How did you progress from Entotech and move really through where you are now with the Invasive Species Corporation?
Yeah, so Entertech, I got a call from Novo Nordisk, a company I'd never heard of, now very famous company because they make the obesity drugs. But they wanted me to set up a company for them, the first ever R&D based subsidiary outside of Denmark, to screen microbes looking for natural products. So it was a great opportunity. We named it Entotech. It was a freestanding startup, built the building and all that. And then they had some issues in their core businesses, and they sold us to our largest competitor. And I said, okay, this time I gotta do a completely freestanding. So that was a good lessons learned, a lot of lessons learned, and screened another 55,000 microbes there. And then set up AgriQuest, raised 60 million in venture capital, almost got it public, but filed right before 9/11, 2001. So that didn't happen, and the IPO didn't happen. And then I left to start up Marrone Bio Innovations. A few years later, it was AgriQuest was sold to Bayer Crop Science for almost 500 million. At Marrone, and we screened another 30-something thousand microbes, discovered Serenade, which is now blockbuster biofungicide, breakout biofungicide under Bayer. They've significantly expanded to more countries. We had 38 countries registered when I left, and now it's even in over 100. And then started up Marrone Bio Innovations and took it public, and listed on NASDAQ, and then was sold last year to Bioceres Crop Solutions for 260 million in stock. And so, yeah, that's the history.
Talk about, kind of as a backdrop, because you and I have chatted about this in the past. Biologicals, very, very much in vogue in the conversation these days, but not necessarily a new category. Why the pickup in interest in biologicals, and then along with that, just like you've kind of had a corporate journey, the level of performance of biologicals has been a journey as well, hasn't it?
That's right. So yeah, you're right. This category is not new. I mean, if my father used it when I was 10 years old, we're talking decades ago. And so, but they had been niche products, and a lot of good chemistry was overshadowing the biologicals. And now there's a lot of problems with chemistries in terms of restrictions, pest resistance, carbon footprint, and things. So biologicals are now growing double digits because of their again being able to not leave residues. So global movement of food and crop products and resistance management. And now the big conversation is they can help with reducing carbon footprint, reducing fertilizer. Some countries regions like Europe have reductions in fertilizers and chemical mandates. So those are driving, but more important, most like you touched on it, the products have improved dramatically over time. So I'd say every 10 years, every decade, there's new science, new tools, new things. Like, for example, now you can sequence a microbe very inexpensively. You can get the full gene sequence. You can find out all the genes and what those genes are doing. So therefore, you can make the product a lot better in fermentation than you ever had by using that knowledge of the genes to amp up in fermentation and make really potent and high yielding products that could have the cost and effectiveness. And then formulation technology is improving dramatically. There are microbes that I've developed that were gone within 2 hours because they were so sensitive to the sun, and so they wouldn't last long enough. And so you love that biodegradability. And then the formulation technology is getting better because you can make these more persistent, which you need to do so it can compete with chemicals. So the growers are recognizing that they offer a value in integrated programs, so they offer a return on investment. And that really is the number one driver around the world. But all these other things I mentioned are also driving it as well. When you have fewer chemicals on the market, there's regulatory restrictions. Growers are going to look to what the alternatives are.
Where are growers in terms of you've mentioned kind of the evolution. Are growers pretty open now to biologicals in general, or is there still a certain amount of skepticism, based on past experiences?
the snake oil perception of these and the perception that they're inconsistent is changing. But if you look at any survey around the globe, whether it's in row crops or high value specialty crops, about half of all growers still are confused or unknowledgeable about or just don't have the education and how to use these properly about the biologicals. So there's still a lot of work to do. Now, the 40 to 50% that are using biologicals in the surveys tend to rate them quite well. So once you get over that knowledge gap and you learn how to use these, because they do have different modes of action, and you have to learn than chemicals, and they might have slower kill. They have to be used more preventatively rather than curatively. And so once growers use them, they have favorable opinions of them. But we still have a lot of that education gap to bridge.
I really like to pick up a comment you made a few moments ago, Pam, when you talked about the double-digit growth, which is, extraordinary. The fact that growth is taking place. Part of that, you say, is down to the fact that the products themselves are getting better, and there's more grower acceptance. I want to look at one particular geography, which is Brazil, where we're seeing an extraordinary increase in use and adoption of biologicals. What is it, do you think, about that landscape in Brazil that's really driving that acceleration? Because my understanding is potentially by 2030, Brazil may be using more biologicals than the entire United States.
Yes, Brazil is rapidly becoming the number one market for biologicals. And what's very interesting is that the first use and successful use of biologicals in large acre row crops, whereas it's always been specialty crops elsewhere. So what is this to the secret of Brazil, and why this even faster growth and adoption? Number one, the regulatory agencies started accelerating the approval. So you can get a product through the Brazil Regulatory Authority in a year. And EPA in the U.S. has slowed down dramatically. They're understaffed for the volume of new active ingredients going through. So it's taking longer, more like 2+ years. And so that's driving a lot of new products. But you can get a lot of new products on the market, as we know, and then they're not adopted if the growers don't understand how to use them. So the first use of biologicals by growers in Brazil was not successful. But then what each state did was set up biological extension type grower education people to help the growers understand how to use the products. And that really is a real secret to it. And also at the same time, they had a lot of problems with pest resistance, fall armyworm, nematodes, and not a lot of solutions to some tough pests. So regulatory, how to use them and have that education and bridging that education gap. And then, the chemicals needed better solutions than chemicals. So those three are the drivers.
That's interesting. I think those are really important lessons, not just for the United States, but for other countries around the world to learn from, to encourage that.
Especially Europe. I mean, here, the sustainable use legislation just got turned down. Why? Because the farmers lobbied to not have this passed, which had significant pesticide reduction targets. But in that legislation was ways to accelerate biologicals. We still want that. So you can't cut chemicals without having alternatives. And the farmers, realized that, obviously, and lobbied very loudly for that. So Europe needs a much better regulatory system for biologicals and not keep looking at them like they're still chemicals.
Question for you, though. Obviously, the farmers being concerned about too tight a timeline, and we've certainly had this conversation, and it's even part of our Platform 10 thinking that the regulatory environment continues to be an important factor. But on the other hand, there are just gaps in the marketplace in terms of available tools that synthetics or current tools just simply aren't getting the job done. So where do you see the greatest opportunity for biologicals, just from a pure innovation standpoint, that there's nothing out there to solve key problems or challenges growers are facing?
When you ask growers anywhere in the world, but let's talk about Western growers growers. We've asked a number of them, and it's amazing the litany of pests and diseases that they still list. And even though these are not organic growers we talk to, they're large users of chemicals, and it's remarkable how many pests and diseases they still need solutions to. Why? Because pest resistance is one, and then there's new threats that come in. There's invasive species that come in. So the best adoption of biologicals is going to be where there's an unmet market need and growers need new solutions. So my advice to any, biological company is, don't develop a product that's pushing up against 5 other biopesticides and 10 other chemicals. Talk to the growers, talk to your customers, and find out where they're needing solutions. Bioherbicides, okay, it would be great to get some alternatives to problematic chemicals, and because there's such widespread weed resistance now, we need a lot of new solutions, and nothing available for organic that's affordable, really. And then you've got things like insecticide resistance to thrips. You've got a need for nematicides and fumigant replacements. You've got a neonic replacements, big need, neonicotinoid replacements. On the disease side, for some parts of California, where botrytis and powdery mildew are resistant to all chemical classes, Central Coast, for example. So that's a great opportunity for biologicals in there. And then bacterial diseases. Glassy wing sharpshooter transmits Pierce's disease. You've got Asian citrusilla transmitting HLB, and on and on. So there's these tough bacterial diseases. So they're just a sum of the needs out there. And every time you talk to a grower, you get this information about what their needs are. And that's a great way to focus a company on those unmet needs.
I'd like to go back one step, Pam, if we may, and just pick up the question of regulation again. I know I was here in March in California when the pest management roadmap for California was released, and that set 2050 as a date. And one of the conversations I've had with some growers in California is they think 2050 is the kind of the deadline. One of my comments is actually 2030 is probably a more realistic date to look for regulators, outside the region, in terms of beginning to remove some of those chemical pesticides. What's your view in terms of the impact that might have in terms of accelerating investment into biologicals and actually accelerating the growth of biological product?
Regulatory does tend to drive biologicals and get biological adoption, but I don't think anyone can rely on that being the major driver. I'd still think you have to have products that perform and offer a return on investment to growers. But on the regulatory front, California, for example, I was on the Sustainable Pest Management Working Group where we had those 2050 targets. California already has restrictions, and growers, complaining, saying we need alternatives. Fumigants, for example, got rid of chlorpyrifos, and some other OPs and so forth. So I do think 2030 is probably more realistic than 2050. 2050 is a long time out. 2030, I think the regulators there's going to be more regulatory action on that. And certainly growers are clamoring for alternatives. And that is definitely a driver of adoption. If you look at not just the pest management side, but you look at the fertilizer side, the reduction of fertilizer targets in Europe has driven the growth of biostimulants, and big companies making big acquisitions in that space in order to get into a whole new category for themselves outside of crop protection.
With Platform 10, and we've in terms of putting together a global grower trial network and a product focus, we've been more focused on biocontrols, biopesticides, but talk about the biostimulant category in general. As you recall from participating in the biological summit in Salinas, we saw some 1,200 different companies. How do you sort through all that if you're a grower? Obviously, you have to rely on your PCAs, your dealers, et cetera, who you do business with. But I mean, I've got to believe that category contracts pretty sharply at some point.
Yeah, because of the lower regulatory barriers, the biostimulant category and the bionutrient category is very crowded, more so than the biocontrol, biopesticide. And as a result, growers are even more confused by that. And there are still bugs in a jug or bathtub brews that are snake oily type in there. Now, the Bioproducts Industry Alliance, BPIA.org, this is a trade group I set up a long time ago in 2000 as a biopesticide industry alliance, BPIA. And now we've added this biostimulants to that trade group. So recognizing that the whole biostimulant category needed to be scienced up, like we did biocontrol, and improving their reputation. So that's what that trade group is really focused on. So, but for any biological, what do growers need to see? They need to see that you have field data that shows the return on investment and that's offering some value compared to their existing program. And I mean, number one, I keep making this point. It's what's the ROI? What's the value? What data does the company have? Do they know the mode of action, and can they articulate the science behind their products and how they work? That's really important, because a number of times you'll have companies who'll say they don't know, or they say it's proprietary. Well, that's not going to cut it with a grower. Growers are really, in my experience, really want to know the science. Most growers I talk to want to know the science behind how does this work and how can they integrate it into their program. Then, of course, you have to have the use characteristics worked out. A lot of times biologicals have really broad labels. They're different from chemicals, which, much more specific. But, you look at a biological label and, it looks like you can use it on everything. That's not helpful to a grower. A grower wants to know the specific use, at what time of year, the exact water volumes, how many applications, what is it going to do, and timing, synced with the phenology of the crop or what have you. And sometimes companies don't, and I'll be critical of my own industry, sometimes companies don't do that well enough. And I hear growers complaining over and over again that they don't get that specific use instructions. And so that is absolutely necessary to bridge that knowledge gap and how to successfully use these products.
Moving away just temporarily from biologicals per se, really interested to get your view on climate and the impact that you think climate is going to have on potentially the introduction of new pests going forward, and how growers should begin to adapt to that kind of changing environment. Because I think, the one thing we all understand, and myself and Dennis, we've spent 2 days at the Organic Growers Summit over the past 2 days, and the word climate arose possibly more frequently than I've seen at previous conferences here. Really like to understand your view as to what impact that might have on the proliferation of different pests and its impact on crops.
Climate change is definitely increasing pest pressure and changing pests. There's no question, changing their range. We've got introduction of new pests and invasive species. Just a report just a couple of months ago from a consortium of 140 countries led by the United Nations said invasive species are causing $423 billion of damage every year and getting worse. And invasive species are the second largest cause of biodiversity decline. So it's a massive thing and getting worse with climate change. So we're seeing that. So yes, it is a major driver too, and means we'll all have job security, because there'll be always some new pest, and biologicals companies can look at those new pests and come up with solutions. And same with chemical companies. And the second thing on climate change, besides just the movement of pests and increasing pressure of pests, is biologicals are increasingly seen as a solution to reduction of greenhouse gas emission from agriculture. So there is now hard data to show that biologicals can reduce greenhouse gas emissions dramatically compared to use of only synthetics. And that's a big driver. So now, will farmers want to get paid for doing the right things to reduce their carbon footprint? Right now, you can't. There's only a very small smattering of programs where you use a biological and you actually get paid for the carbon credits that you get for that. I think that's a big trend in the future. You'll see, but it's not just about carbon. Biologicals can increase biodiversity on the farm. You'll talk to farmers and they talk about using biologicals and they say, "Oh, I see so many other predators and parasites on my farm than I usually do when I use biological." So there's increase in soil health, reduction of carbon, and improvement of biodiversity, all of which we'd love to have farmers get paid for.
Pam, one of the other things I wanted to bring up and chat about was, kind of looking ahead to this year's summit. We were talking about your returning, and we still get great reviews on your presentation from last year's summit. And this year you talked about it's the technology flavor of the day, AI. Everybody's talking about it, but it's on your mind as well. And from where I sit, typically you're thinking about the right big things. So how does AI play in all of this?
AI is a tool, just like gene sequencing and things that are now enabling us to make better products. AI is a tool and will indeed be immersed in all things we do. I am dabbling in it now because I would like to discover a bioherbicide, a better one more rapidly, a less costly one. And so I'm dabbling with how can we find a better microbe that's a bioherbicide, so using AI. So we'll see how it goes. This is new stuff, but AI is going to be immersed in all aspects of farm production and pest management because you can use AI to look at your crop and see what stage it is and when the pathogens come in, and can predict better when the pathogens come in or not. And so we're gonna see it everywhere eventually, for sure. But it's again another tool that's going to drive better efficiency on the farm.
Just talking of other tools, Pam. One area which I think will become increasingly important is the whole area of genetics. And I'm just wondering whether in your work, whether you use tools such as CRISPR and other gene editing tools to basically develop the kind of applications and solutions you're looking for.
There are biological companies like Pivot Bio that has gene edited a microbe to produce more nitrogen, to reduce nitrogen fertilizer. They've done quite well with it. So that's one of the first gene edited microbes. But I'm seeing lots of other startups focusing on this. RobiGo is working on genetically engineered microbes as biofungicides. Forum Bio is working on genetically engineered microbes for better phosphorus uptake. I myself am staying away from that because I'm a little bit worried about the regulatory and public acceptance, especially it's GMO versus gene editing. So I've always been very successful at being able to find and amp up naturally occurring microbes without those tools, but they are no question going to be very valuable tools, and maybe something that we're going to need, and we call it synthetic bio, in being able to amp up a microbe to produce more of a bioherbicide in the future. Maybe we'll have to transfer the genes from that production of that bioherbicide from one microbe to another to get the levels we need to compete with glyphosate. So we'll see. I'll certainly be looking at those tools. In the meantime, the natural world, we've only harvested or found bioprospected for a very small amount of nature's biodiversity. So there's still a lot to discover, even certainly among the naturally occurring microbes.
Could you talk a little bit? I want you to talk a little bit about your new company, because I'm thinking back to when we started chatting about it, that you saw a need in the marketplace that just it wasn't getting addressed. And I, even though I was a grower shipper, and as we like to say around here, in the deal for a number of years, I was more of a sales and marketing type. So when I think about biologicals, I think of it just, if I'm going to lose this, I get that. But the biological world is so much broader than just, an input. It's you're for instance, like what you're doing now in terms of dealing with let's say the use of insects to deal with issues. How does that all work? I mean, what really is the biological space? It's what are all the kind of the key elements of it?
Well, it's yes, the biological space is very broad, so it covers microbials, microorganisms, and covers natural substances. So biochemicals, these can be nature identical natural compounds that mimic something in nature, and can be controlling a pest or increasing crop growth, and they can be peptides or RNAi. Both of those are certainly new things that are coming along, and you'll see a lot of new products in those areas coming in the future. And then you do have gene-edited, CRISPR-edited insects that's going to be, you'll see out in the market for spotted wing Drosophila, so controlling some of our pests by actually, radiating insects and putting them out for sterile insect technology to reduce populations of insects is going on as well. But you're going to see gene-edited insects out. So you're going to have actual, macroorganisms out there. And also on that macroorganism, what I mean by, beneficials, predatory mites and parasitic wasps and things like that. It's interesting. There are companies like BioBest and Cooper that have been able to find new strains and new substrains and new species of beneficial insects and mites that are making that category even better. Just like we're able to find better strains of microbes, they find better strains of mites and other organisms, and then they're applied by drones. I've seen them out California. These things applied by drones out in strawberry fields, so better application of these things. And then with pheromones, always a very fast, a very exciting new category that I thought didn't have much innovation. And then there's all these startups who are then making pheromones instead of synthetically, making them by like BioPhero, which was bought by FMC, making them in fermentation, and then being able to find them for new pests and invasive species, driving the cost down. And so pheromones is a major area where you can disrupt mating disruption, almonds for navel orangeworm and other vine mealybug and things. So that's a major new area of a lot of innovation in an old category, I would say.
Just picking up a couple of points that you've made there, Pam. Looking at the technology, when I look at biologicals, I think very often the focus is very much on the input itself. But
Yes.
of course, that input requires a whole stack of ecosystem players around it, whether it's sprayers, whether it's monitors, whether it's sensors.
Yeah.
So how do you see that kind of broader biological ecosystem developing in terms of the types of technology that will be required to support the introduction and application of biologicals?
There is no doubt there's a merging of biology and technology right now. And we're just at the early stages. So I advise a company, Root Applied Sciences, and there are other companies in that space as well, Scanet and Spornado, that have used genetic means, so something like PCR technique, to detect spores real time. So a farmer, if you look at the degree day models, which has always been used, so weather models to predict when pests are there, they're inaccurate. And now you can see that real-time spore detection through these smart traps or real-time insect detection. There's several smart trapping companies, and real-time is making pest management and application of biologicals much more efficient. Same now with also with smart sprayers and vision guided spraying or sensor guided spray. There's a lot going on in that area. Robots. So we're really just at the early stages of this, and what we're missing often are the systems integrators. In a whole biological system, you have, in the way we train scientists, and they're trained as entomologists, plant pathologists, agronomists, and then they go off to their career in a university and they're the entomology specialist. They're the farm advisor for California in this particular crop and this particular pest. And then what the farmers want is integrating of these tools, biologicals with chemicals, with technology, And we need a lot more systems integrators on the farm than we have today. So the new young people coming through, and I'm seeing that there's a assistant professor at Cornell, Katie Gold, who loves tech. And so she's one of the new generation of extension specialists and researchers who's integrating both on the farm. And that's very exciting to see.
So the integrators of the future will come out of, for instance, the extension side, the corporate side, or all of the above?
This is interesting because that's a good question, because in our sustainable pest management working group, one of the things we identified was we really need to change the way researchers at the university are being trained, and in much more systems-based, holistic systems-based, integrated programs-based, instead of single disciplines, and also the consultants and pest control advisors that advise farmers need retooling in this as well. So I think we're in a transition, and at the academy, we're going to have to change a lot of the way we train. It's going to be a lot more interdisciplinary and a lot more systems-based, a lot more tech-based or smart farm-based training than is currently now.
And if the marketplace, i.e. the growers, because they've got to respond to either regulators, customers, et cetera, need, as you know, growers often think they're drinking from a fire hose.
That's right.
Who drives this systems integration? I mean, you can lay out the problem, but then who are the driver? Who are the likely drivers of this? And my favorite ag answer is always, it depends. I mean, it could be a very proactive, progressive university setting. It could be a particular, UC and I'll just choose one. Somebody like UC Kearney, or is it a dealer?
I'm seeing a bit of all of that. I'm seeing it happening at sometimes as you've got new extension specialists coming in, and they have a real penchant for this. You're seeing that change, or same with certain consultants or just agronomists, that dealers. It really, I wouldn't say there's one central thing happening, but it is happening. And farmers are certain, farmers own a lot of farmers have their own in-house folks, and they have an onslaught of both tech companies as well as biological companies wanting to test things on the farm, which brings us back to this initiative, Platform 10, why it is so important to do this on-farm testing and integration, because there is a gap of people who are actually doing the integration on farm. I'm really pleased to see this initiative, because we need to go from bridging completely perfect, perfectly designed academic, randomized, complete split blot, single testing one biological or one technology against a single other technology, a very reductionist way. That is important, but farmers want to know what it's going to do on their farm. So this initiative of testing on farm, more realistic integration of biologicals is really exciting, because that's really going to drive adoption, I think. Giving farmers more confidence in how they can use these products is really the key.
And this is almost a Peter and Pam question simultaneously. Peter, putting on, representing kind of the international side of all this, certain countries, as I've observed, are, do a pretty good job of integrating government, education, and the private sector. So relative to this initiative or this area, are our international friends likely to be real leaders in this? And Pam, you're all over the world as well. But Peter, what?
Yeah, no, I mean, clearly, I mean, a lot of this conversation has been based, I guess, around probably a California mindset. But certainly when, I look around the world, the challenges that growers in California face are very, very similar. They're not abstract, they're not insular. So the challenges with pests are global ones. In New Zealand, we've got a really interesting program called A Lighter Touch. And that's a great example, Dennis, of where industry and government have got together. So that's a 7-year program. $27 million has been committed to it, 60% from industry and 40% from government. But what I think is really interesting about that particular project is what you've got there is that the industry element is made up of a number of different, what I might call product verticals. So potatoes New Zealand, onions New Zealand, apple and pears New Zealand. They realize that those pests don't necessarily restrict themselves to a single crop, work across crops. And so rather than kind of putting together 15 different programs, they're actually getting together to put together a single 7-year program, and that's already producing great results. So I think there are examples and templates worldwide that we can definitely learn from. And again, Pam, I guess, also very kindly brought us back to Platform 10. If you look at Platform 10, there are really three elements to it. The field trials, which we've been talking about, also these podcasts. And these podcasts are really designed to help growers learn more about what's actually happening. So there's a kind of education process. And then in June next year, we'll have the summit once again in Salinas, where we'll pull together those growers and those product companies who are taking part in these field trials. And we'll be able to then take it to that next stage, which will be the development of a global trial network, where we'll be talking to countries and growers in both northern and southern hemisphere, which I hope will enable us to accelerate a lot of this work, because we'll be working with 2 seasons a year with a counter-seasonal area. And I'm pretty sure, and this is converting this as a kind of segue now to a question for Pam. Pam, you do spend, as Dennis implied, quite a bit of time offshore. What's your experience of the development of this type of technology and interest in biologicals in other parts of the world?
Yeah, it's interesting whether it's Brazil or Chile or someplace in Europe or whatever. It's interesting. The growers, and I agree with you because you said this earlier, the growers have pretty much similar problems and similar mindset, in that there's some growers who are users and others who are non-users, and you got to bridge the gap and how to improve that confidence. So growers seem to be have a similar experience with biologicals everywhere around the globe, I'm seeing. And so what excites me is about a new generation of biologicals companies who are working with growers from the very start. And this is what I'd like to do also with my companies that I've always started up, is that version 1.0 of your biological, get it out with growers when it's good enough, and get it tested by your customer and have them give you feedback on that product. And then that goes into version 2.0 and 3.0. We can do that with biologicals. Can't do that with chemicals as much, because the regulatory is much more onerous, and it takes $300 million and 12 years to get a product to market. You can get a biological to market for a few $1 million in 3-4 years or 5, and get those versions out. And the growers want them because it serves that unmet need that we talked about. So then, but there's a mindset change that needs to happen, because there's a group of advisors, whether it's a pest control advisor, a crop consultant, university extension specialist, that's used to the model of big company coming in, thousands of field trials, the product is perfectly vetted, and then they know exactly how to use it, and it's launched, you launch the grower. And so there's a huge level of confidence when that academic makes a recommendation in their recommendation book for the grower to use a particular product. Not so with biologicals. So one of the things I do a lot around the globe is have everyone understand the difference in business models, that the small, there's a lot of big companies in biologicals now. Most of the innovation is happening in small companies, and they're going to introduce a product when it's maybe has 100 trials behind it, not 1,000. So there's some data, and that's perfectly okay. It might make those key influencers, the consultants or the pest control advisors or the extension specialists, uncomfortable about recommending the product when it's at that stage, because it doesn't have the 1,000 field trials like a chemical. But the growers I talk to want it, and that especially, particularly the early adopters, want to try it because they know it fills a need on their farm, and they don't have chemicals to fill that need. So they're willing to take it and run with it. And I know a company, one of the ones I advise, called Illicit Plant, that has a product that reduces drought stress with some plant-based sterile compounds. And one of the co-founders is a farmer, and this has worked beautifully. And I've seen it sold also Europe in some of the biostimulant companies, Rovenza, Next companies, and others, where they started and brought in the co-ops very early in their formulation development and got that version 1.0 with farmers. And because of that, there's faster innovation, faster cycle turnaround of what the product needs to look like to be accepted by growers. And then when launched, the growers have a lot more confidence and the adoption is much faster.
Peter, I think we're getting a pretty good primer for the future.
I think we're getting an extremely good primer for the future, and also, but this is also based on experience from the past. And but as Pam has been saying, we're still relatively early days, and I think really exciting in terms of looking ahead at the opportunities that are likely to come.
Yeah, Pam, we sure appreciate your time and your insights. You have certainly lived up to the office of the Queen, and we and we appreciate that. And Peter, we were talking about, we're getting ready to design next year's program and, coming attractions. And Pam, you will be one of our feature attractions again in June. So we're going to be excited to have you front and center again. And we'll be anxious to also hear a progress report on how invasive species is doing and coming along.
Well, sure. I'm happy to talk about my company any day. But what I'd love to talk about also is what's happened in that year since the last summit, and it'll be from June to June. What's happened? And wow, if you're slow in this industry, you're going to be left out because everything is changing so fast. We talked about climate, the world. We have wars. We have changes, movement of people. Farm technology. Everything is changing so fast. AI coming. So you've got to move in this industry, and a lot will have changed in 1 year.
Indeed. I'm still shocked, though, that neither of you know what a doyen is. So I think by the time we
Google it, but I can't spell it.
Well, I think though that's better than I was called the Wayne Gretzky of biologicals. Then someone said, no, she's more like the Dick Butkus. And then I went, oh my God.
Go with Doyen.
Doyen.
Yeah,
I'm going to go with Doyen.
Yeah, go with Doyen. Yeah.
There we go.
The Dick Butkus was a hell of a linebacker, Pam. So it was kind of a compliment.
No, absolutely.
I'll take the Doyen. Yeah.
There you go. All right.
Stick with Doyen. But Pam, it's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Pam, thanks for joining us today. And
awesome.
We'll look forward to seeing you soon. And
right.
Peter, thanks. We got another episode in the can, so let's do it again in a couple of weeks.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you so much for your doing. We're also passionate about getting these products adopted, and let's do it.
Well, we appreciate your passion and conveying that spirit. We hope it's contagious. Thanks, Pam.
Thanks, Pam.
Bye-bye.
All right.